Hey guys, Pieguyrulz here, and welcome to Spongey Bits, where I take some episode reviews from my big SpongeBob review series, put them all together with a central theme, and then elaborate on them and go more in depth than I have in the full season reviews. This time we'll be covering all the meh episodes from seasons 1 through 3. Before I begin, let me just reiterate exactly what the meh rating is. It's not a good episode, it's not a bad episode. It's either mixed in that it has some good qualities and some bad qualities that prevent it from being either good or bad, or nothing about the episode stands out in any way, shape, or form. Sometimes I just watch an episode and I just don't feel anything, and I can't really call it a good episode, but really, is it a bad episode? So yeah, it's the middle ground rating. A lot of people ask me why I don't add other ratings like a really good or a really bad or anything like that. It's because meh is the middle ground. Either something's good, bad, or the middle ground. I kind of leave it vague there so that you guys can fill in the rest of whether it lands more towards a good episode or lands more towards a bad episode. That's up to you. So let's kick things off with the first episode that I consider to be meh.
Squidward the Unfriendly Ghost. SpongeBob and Patrick think Squidward is a ghost. Fun fact, this is one of the rare times that Nicktoon uses the word dead. In fact, the entire plot is revolved around them thinking Squidward is dead. Anyway, my favorite part is the wallpaper gag. Really didn't see that coming the first time I watched it. So, is this episode dead in the water or heavenly? Actually, it's neither. It's a meh episode. Yeah, I wasn't thrilled with this one, guys. I found the plot to be interesting, but not interesting enough, and there weren't too many really good jokes in the episode. Don't get me wrong, it had a few funny gags, but not as hilarious as the other episodes, and I find the plot to be a little bit awkward at times. It's not bad enough to be considered a SpongeBob episode, but there is definitely something lacking from this episode.
And I think it's actually the pacing. A lot of this episode moves very slowly. Like, there are periods without much in the way of jokes where it's just Squidward bossing around SpongeBob and Patrick. The gags that work really well, like the watermelon gag and Patrick knowing about head injuries, and I really like the sequence at the beginning where they're playing that really random game with no rules. Another issue is that I'm not entirely sure who I should be rooting for in this scenario. I mean, you have SpongeBob, who's being stupid beyond belief, and did, although accidentally, ruin Squidward's statue, and you have Squidward, who is being a complete jerk, although in fairness he was wronged, and he does try to correct it towards the end, but SpongeBob is still being an idiot, so he doesn't realize it. And speaking of which, what is the conflict of this episode? Like, really? It's a lot like Hocus Pocus in that we know Sponge and Pat didn't actually kill Squidward, so there's actually nothing at stake, nothing really going on. Sure, a lot of episodes can pull off the non-conflict, but I don't think that this one did. It's slow, and some of the characters are clunky, but the jokes that work do work really well. Plus, it has a pie in it.
Episode 12A, The Chaperon. SpongeBob accompanies Pearl to the prom. Fun fact, SpongeBob couldn't get a date to his own prom, and Patrick went with his mom. What a dork. Anyway, my favorite part is the Do the Sponge song. Really, how can anyone resist it? But, is this episode sponge-tacular, or is it scum-tacular? Actually, it's meh-tacular. Yeah, I wasn't thrilled with this one either. The plot is interesting enough, I suppose, but it's very much out of the show's element, dealing with teenage satire. It occasionally delves there with Pearl, but not very often, and this is the first time they did it. It just doesn't seem to work here, and especially the ending to the plot where it's Sponge Dummy that went with Pearl. How does that make any sort of sense? And I know it's supposed to be a gag, but I don't find it particularly funny, especially consider it pretty much ruins the plot of the episode, or makes it make no sense whatsoever. If it were funnier, maybe I could excuse it, but it's really not. There's also a lot of gags in this episode that just don't work. Also, a lot of random violence happening in the background of this episode, which can be funny, but I found wasn't executed well enough here. Again, there were some good parts. The song itself, Do the Sponge, is pretty funny and awesome parody of dance crazes, and there are some interesting concepts and funny gags in the episode. So not bad, just meh.
I think I pretty much nailed this review from the start. There's not much I have to add here. I do want to make it clear, though, that that bad ending doesn't ruin the plot, it just brings it down a little bit. But let's be honest, even on some of the best episodes of SpongeBob, the endings are really stupid. In fact, I could probably do a top 10 list on the worst endings in SpongeBob. Anyway, the last thing I want to say is that Mr. Krabs' joke about keeping away from me flour, yeah, I find that a lot more funny now than I did as a kid. I don't really think I understood it, but no, it's a good joke.
Neptune's spatula! SpongeBob faces King Neptune in a fry cook-off. Fun fact, John O'Hurley voices King Neptune in this episode. No, it's not the same King Neptune we see in the movie, or in the other part of the series. Let's not dwell on that, though. My favorite part is the fry cook-off. But is this episode unfit to even scrub the royal tail fin? Or is it a good episode? Actually, it's meh. Yeah, I even asked you guys on Twitter what you thought of this episode, and while no one could really call it a bad episode, no one was really defending it that hard. It's just a meh episode. There's not too many good gags, and for some reason, it's just really forgettable. It also doesn't help the fact that it doesn't have that strong continuity, considering King Neptune here is different than the King Neptune we see later, and is much more memorable when we see him then. There's also a few other gags that I just don't feel really work with this episode. I don't know what it is, but I can't find myself calling it a good episode.
One thing that bothers me about the episode, and it's a small thing, but still kind of annoying, is that Patrick's face is on his butt the entire episode. It was used for one gag, but for some reason stuck around throughout the entire thing. Yeah, they make another joke about it, but really, it just kind of seems awkward and weird to keep him out of model for too long. After you've made the joke, get rid of it in the next scene. It's what you do with all the other gags. The episode is visually cool, like, there's some cool action scenes with King Neptune flipping the burgers with his magic and all that sort of stuff, but really, nothing stands out here. I will say there are some gags that are funny, but nothing super funny, nothing really quotable, nothing that would keep this episode in your mind. Also, this episode brings up Atlantis, which is something I'd rather not think about.
Bubble Buddy. SpongeBob and his bubble pal annoy the citizens of Bikini Bottom. Fun fact, Leif Erikson Day is a real holiday. Who knew? Anyway, my favorite part is when SpongeBob and Bubble Buddy are on the beach, and SpongeBob tells Bubble Buddy to shake his bubble butt, but the health nuts at the beach think that he's talking about them and insulting them, and it's actually really funny. But does this episode fit into the bubble of good episodes, or the bubble of bad episodes? Actually, it's on the bubble of both, meaning it's a meh episode. Yeah, I thought long and hard about this one, guys. I really felt bad about calling this episode meh, because, hey, Bubble Buddy, it's classic, right? Well, actually, not really. Yes, the Leif Erikson Day thing is really funny and really memorable for whatever reason, but the rest of the episode is just really irritating. Because if you slice it as Bubble Buddy being animate, well then Bubble Buddy did such horrendous things as let Scooter die and waste hours of people's lives by spending time in the bathroom, and if Bubble Buddy is inanimate, well then SpongeBob is just being a jerk and annoying everyone all day to indulge in his fantasies. Of course, Bubble Buddy is animate, but that doesn't really make too much sense, and the entire episode, like I said, just boils down to SpongeBob and Bubble Buddy, who doesn't speak until the end of the episode, annoying everyone, and not in any sort of clever way. It's just really frustrating to watch and not particularly funny. I hate to say it, but it is a meh episode. It's only saved by the Leif Erikson Day bits and a few funny gags here and there.
Again, I think I've already said most of what I needed to. There's nothing particularly wrong with this episode outside of some dubious morality on Bubble Buddy's part. It just doesn't stand out. It's not that good. A lot of the jokes are repetitive because pretty much Bubble Buddy is the source of most of the humor in the episode, and it just isn't that interesting. There are some jokes that work, but nothing's really gut-bustingly funny.
Dumped. SpongeBob gets jealous when Gary starts spending a lot of time with Patrick. Fun fact, Gary purrs like a cat, because Gary pretty much is a cat. Because snails are cats. SpongeBob is weird. Anyway, my favorite part is Gary playing with Patrick. But, should I dump this episode in with the good ones or the bad ones? Well, actually, it's gonna go with the meh episodes. Yeah, I'm gonna be honest, I really wanted to give this one a good episode moniker, but for the life of me, I couldn't really remember any jokes that were particularly funny. Don't get me wrong, it's not bad or anything, it's nice to watch, it's quite an interesting story, and there are a few gags that kinda work, I suppose, but nothing is really that funny. And compared to the other episodes in the season, wow, is this one just missing something?
This felt like a season 4 episode with how few jokes it had and how the plot was actually kind of intriguing, but it just was missing something without a decent amount of jokes. Actually, it is kind of a season 4 episode. Have You Seen the Snail and Dumped are pretty much the same exact plot, right down to the fact that Gary leaves because of food. This episode also drags like that one. There's a few good moments here and there, some good line delivery and stuff, but nothing is crazy memorable, and there are significant portions of this episode that don't have any jokes whatsoever, and it's just SpongeBob crying or being sad. It's perfectly passable, but not an episode that I would specifically seek out to watch again.
Ugh. Or technically, shouldn't it be episode 54, SpongeGar? Anyway, the ancient ancestors of SpongeBob, Patrick, and Squidward discover fire. Fun fact, this is the second time since SB129 we see ancient ancestors of SpongeBob and Patrick. My favorite part? The sound design in this episode is actually really phenomenal. Considering the storytelling is done with no English and very minimal grunts at that, the sound design itself has to be pretty phenomenal to help tell the story. Over on the Patchy side, we have episode 54P, SpongeBob BC, before comedy. Patchy and Potty debate whether the future or the past is the cooler time period. Fun fact, the caveman is played by Bill, the voice of Patrick. My favorite part is, of course, the song, When Worlds Collide. The Patchy segments here are a lot better than the house party ones. They feature a lot of weird effects, a caveman rapping with a robot. It's incredibly strange, but incredibly awesome at the same time. How about the SpongeBob segments? Well, they're not bad. It's actually interesting how they tell this story without using language. There's some different gags with the fire, and... Okay, so SpongeBob BC is a very appropriate name for this, because it is before comedy. This episode isn't funny. They are able to tell a story, they have some things happen, but none of it is really that funny. To me, some of SpongeBob's best gags are word-based humor, and when they can't speak English and the special drags on for 22 minutes, unlike the very short episode Reef Blower, it misses something. It just doesn't quite get the humor. There's some visual humor, it's not devoid of comedy, it's just not enough. And the visual gags pretty much amount to this. There's gags about Gary's slime, there's gags about discovering fire, and then there's gags about the three of them fighting over the fire. That's pretty much it. I applaud the writers for coming up with a strange concept like this and following it through, and being able to tell the story decently well without any English. But at the same time, I have to say they missed out on the most important element. Luckily though, the Patchy segments are decently funny, but I don't think it's enough for me to call this a good episode. I have to call it a meh episode. It's a shame too, because maybe with a few more jokes thrown in here and there, the episode could have been truly great. But as it stands, it's just an interesting experiment that's not particularly memorable.
The biggest problem with this episode is the lack of variety. Because there's only visual humor, you get tired of it. If they had some wordplay jokes thrown in here and there, you mix it up. A lot of these jokes are good, but certainly could have been cut back. I feel like they were probably extended for time reasons. Patchy segments aside, the whole thing is just kind of dull.
Born-again Krabs. After a near-death experience, Mr. Krabs vows to be more generous. Fun fact, Mr. Krabs uses his middle name, which is Harold by the way, to fool the Dutchman. My favorite part? The ambulance subversion. But is this episode spongy or scummy like a nasty patty? Wait, I think I did that one. Anyway, it's a meh episode. It's not a bad episode or anything, it's just a little bit light in the jokes, and it also is a little bit too light in the consequences. Mr. Krabs gets to live, and SpongeBob gets sent back in the end. Really, nothing was accomplished from any of this. And I could forgive that if the episode was funnier, it just really wasn't. It's not a bad setup or anything, I just feel like it didn't deliver that well. But that's just my opinion. I could see people loving this episode, and I could see people hating this episode. Also, isn't it odd that Pearl isn't in this episode? I mean, her dad pretty much dies, and she doesn't even show up. It's like the writers completely forget she exists unless she's necessary for the plot. When you have a teenage daughter, she kinda needs to be aware of these sort of things. But I guess it's applying real-world logic to SpongeBob.
I really don't have anything else to say here. The episode is just really forgettable. But I think the absolute worst part is how the plot just literally grinds to a halt. The Flying Dutchman just says, "Alright, fine, Krabs, I'll let you stay." And then, after he takes SpongeBob away, he's just like, "Alright, here's SpongeBob back." Life is literally at stake here. The stakes have never been higher in a SpongeBob episode, and you decide to resolve the plot by just saying, alright, fine, you can stay, and here's SpongeBob back, he was annoying. I didn't want the characters to be banished to Davy Jones' locker for the rest of the episodes, but still, make it a little bit harder than that.
Krabby Land. Mr. Krabs builds a shoddy theme park to scam kids out of their money. Fun fact, the title card is actually shown within the episode. My favorite part? Lima beans. So, is it spongy or scummy? It's pretty meh. This setup deserved a lot funnier of an episode than it actually had. I mean, there were some good bits. I like what the kids did with the money at the end of the episode, I like the whole first day of summer thing, and I kinda like the idea of Mr. Krabs building a really crummy theme park, but I feel like they didn't really go far enough with it. In fact, Krabby Land wasn't even really the main focus of the episode. It was Krabby the Clown. There were long periods of this episode where nothing funny or interesting actually happened. It was just more of SpongeBob hurting himself or Mr. Krabs being a jerk. So I don't think this episode really deserves to be called good.
On the topic of Mr. Krabs being a jerk, yeah, he was over the top, but at least it's pretty obvious he's supposed to be the bad guy of the episode, and he does get a fitting punishment at the end of the episode. I feel like if they toned it back a little bit in this episode, it could have been a lot more funny. Mr. Krabs replacing words with money isn't clever, it's just really lame. Also, the way Mr. Krabs talks about trying to lure kids away from that playground sounds not quite right.
The sponge who could fly. SpongeBob creates a flying machine to fly with the jellyfish, but he gets stuck doing chores. Fun fact, this episode would have served as a series finale of sorts, not including the movie, of course. Anyway, my favorite part is SpongeBob's songs, of course. Over on the Patchy side, we have episode 59P, the Lost Episode. Patchy hunts down the lost episode of SpongeBob. Fun fact, all of Patchy's SpongeBob stuff has a bow tie instead of a tie. I don't know, maybe he had it made for SpongeBob's house party? Seems strange to me. Anyway, my favorite part is the miners singing. Patchy may not get it, but I do. So, spongy or scummy? Well, So let's start with the Patchy stuff. I really like his segments in this episode. I like the concept of there being a lost episode that he has to hunt down. There's some gags with him on a playground, some gags with him thinking he lost the lost episode. It's probably some of Patchy's finest material. So the lost episode thing is kind of clever, even though it's a complete and total lie. They didn't lose any episode. Let's get back to how the SpongeBob side of the episode is. It's really meh. The song is alright, but it's not that memorable, and it does feature quite a few Bikini Bottomites, as well as having some decent jokes and a nice message at the end. It just isn't that interesting, and it's not that funny. As a matter of fact, if the Patchy segments weren't there, I might have just called this episode a SpongeBob one. So yeah, there's not much I don't like in this episode, it just all seems kind of dull. Also, that walk cycle goes on forever.
What I'm finding with a lot of these specials is that they're not balanced evenly. Either they've got too many jokes going on like Party Pooper Pants, or they've got too much story going on like this episode. Not many of the specials come up with a good balance. Christmas Who does it, Dunces and Dragons does it, but a lot of them either focus way too hard on the story or way too hard on the comedy. And if you focus too hard on the comedy, well then there's not really any reason it needs to be an extra long episode. And if you focus on the plot, well, that's good that you're filling out the episode, but you could have spent a little bit of that time telling more jokes. I get the feeling that Nickelodeon mandated the writers to do more special episodes, because some of these just really seem forced.
Pranks a lot. SpongeBob and Patrick use invisibility spray to prank everyone in Bikini Bottom. Fun fact, strangely enough, the Flying Dutchman is not in this episode, despite the fact that everyone makes references to ghosts. Weird, right? Anyway, my favorite part is toast. So, is this last episode spongy or scummy? It's actually meh. Yeah, I am really not crazy about this episode. SpongeBob and Patrick are jerks to most of the people in Bikini Bottom, and I feel like it's very lightweight in substance. I know I said that there have been a lot of very basic plots that work, but this one really doesn't. There are some good gags when SpongeBob and Patrick are scaring people, but other than that, I don't really find this episode particularly funny, and the plot isn't that memorable.
And that's pretty much my feelings on the episode. It's silly without having too much substance. And that's every meh episode from seasons 1 through 3 reviewed. To be honest with you guys, rewatching all of these meh episodes was way worse than watching the SpongeBobs. Partially because there's a lot more of them, and also partially because at least with the SpongeBob episodes, I can hate them. These episodes make me feel either bored or conflicted. Well, anyway, here they all are. You might find them good, you might find them bad. Personally, I just find them meh. Pieguyrulz,